It's time to go grocery shopping. Here's your list. I want you to try and remember it. You go to the grocery store, but whoa, there's so many groceries. Way more than you need and way more than you can possibly fit in your house. So what do? You go through and you select the groceries that you want. Your goal is to take these groceries home, store them in your house, and then obviously eat the food when you're hungry. By the same token, we also face an overabundance of information each day. Our task is to go through and select the information that we'd like to remember. We store it in our brain, and then when the situation arises, we recall it. So, now that you've selected your groceries, you go home and you drop them on your counter. Your counter represents your short-term or working memory. It's a place where you can store your groceries easily, but not for long. Because just like you need your counter for lots of different things, like meal prep and drying dishes, so you also need your working memory for lots of different things, like holding a conversation or writing a list. Plus, there's another problem. And that's that your counter is, well, kind of small, and you can't actually fit all of your groceries on the counter. Our working memory, or our short-term memory, is also limited, and we can only fit between 5 and 9 pieces of information in it. You, though, come up with a very clever solution. If you can stack your groceries in bags, you can fit more groceries on your counter. And indeed, if we can chunk bits of related information in our short-term memory, we can remember 5 to 9 chunks of information, which is actually more than we initially could. Despite this new solution, you still don't want to keep the groceries on your counter. And so what do? You walk back and forth between the counter and your pantry. That walking back and forth represents the rehearsal that we do to get information from our short-term to our long-term memory. Now, there's 2 different ways that you can put those groceries in your pantry. On the one extreme, you take the very quick and easy route. You grab all of your groceries, you shove them in the pantry, and you slam the door. This represents a very shallow level of processing in the memory world. It happens when we maybe briefly skim what we're trying to read or hear, but we don't really think about the information that's coming in. On the other hand, we can neatly organize our groceries in the pantry. We can put the spices by the spices, the baking goods by the baking goods, and maybe breakfast foods by the breakfast foods. This represents a much deeper level of processing. And this happens when we take information, new information, and we integrate it with our existing framework of knowledge. A question for you: in which pantry do you think you'd be able to find the groceries you need when you need them? Probably the organized pantry. And in the very same way, we can better retrieve information that we've encoded using a deeper level of processing. Fast forward to a couple days, and you're sitting there reflecting on the wonderful shopping trip you had. And then you remember the cereal you bought. So you walk to the pantry, look for the yellow box, and enjoy a yummy snack. And that's when you realize that your pantry doesn't just store food. It stores all sorts of information about that food. So the box and the brands give a clue as to where you bought the food. The odors give a clue as to how fresh or perhaps not so fresh the food is. And the ingredient list can tell you exactly what's in that food. And when we remember a new piece of information, we don't just remember that piece of information. We remember all sorts of related contextual information. And remembering that contextual information can actually help us retrieve that memory when we need it. Now, it makes sense to us when we see a counter that's full, that we're not going to try and put more things on the counter. Why then don't we consider the limits of students' working memory when we're teaching? It also makes sense to us that we would organize our pantry so we can grab the food that we want when we want it. Why then aren't we encouraging students to use these deeper levels of processing that'll help them be able to retain this information? Just like buying, storing, and retrieving food is crucial for our survival, so also a thorough understanding of how we encode, store, and retrieve information is crucial for education design. Thank you.